There was a stretch in the late 70s and early 80s when Friday nights belonged to one bright orange Dodge Charger, two cousins on probation, a sheriff who couldn't drive in a straight line, and a corrupt county boss stuffed into a white suit. The Dukes of Hazzard never pretended to be anything other than what it was. Cartoon logic, wearing cowboy boots. Bo and Luke Duke tore through the back roads of a fictional Georgia county. Uncle Jesse dispensed homespun wisdom from the porch. Cousin Daisy redefined what a pair of denim shorts could do to American pop culture. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Boss Hogg schemed his way through another get-rich-quick disaster. For 7 seasons, it was one of the most-watched shows in the country. But behind the freeze-frame endings and the Dixie horn, there's a stranger story than most fans ever learned. Oil fortunes, faked auditions, real tragedy, and a car that got more fan mail than the actual cast. So buckle up, because these are 15 facts about the Dukes of Hazzard that even longtime fans might not know. On screen, Uncle Jesse was a moonshiner in overalls who treated a $20 bill like a small fortune. Off-screen, the man playing him, Denver Pyle, was quietly one of the wealthiest actors on television, and it had almost nothing to do with acting. Before landing the role of Jesse Duke, Pyle had already built a long resume, including his memorable run as Briscoe Darling on The Andy Griffith Show. But starting in the late 1960s, Pyle began doing something most of his fellow character actors never touched: buying up old, nearly tapped-out oil wells in Texas and Colorado, at a time when oil was selling for around $2 a barrel. Most people in the business figured those wells were dead weight. Pyle figured otherwise. Then came the 1973 oil crisis. Prices spiked. New extraction technology made it possible to squeeze meaningful output out of wells everyone had written off. And by the early 80s, crude that once sold for a couple of dollars a barrel was going for over $46. Pyle, who had become a partner in an oil outfit called Otis Energy, ended up making more money from those wells than he'd earned in 3 decades of acting combined. As he put it in an interview at the height of the show's popularity, acting simply provided him the cash flow to keep funding his oil speculation, and he kept doing both because, in his words, he genuinely enjoyed the work. Pyle continued acting well into the 90s, reprising Jesse Duke one last time in a 1997 reunion movie filmed shortly before his death that December. Off-camera, he sponsored Uncle Jesse's fishing tournament, a charity event in Texas that raised well over $100,000 for children's programs over the following decade. So the beard and the overall said backwoods farmer, but the bank account said oil man. And it wasn't close. John Schneider spent 7 seasons playing the quintessential Georgia country boy. In real life, he was an 18-year-old from Mount Kisco, New York, who'd only moved to the Atlanta area as a teenager. When he found out the producers wanted someone in their mid-20s who was genuinely Southern, he didn't let a little thing like the truth get in his way. Schneider showed up to the audition with a few days of stubble, a borrowed beat-up pickup truck, and a 6-pack of beer in hand. He told the casting team he was 24 years old, that he hailed from a town called Snellville, Georgia. Real, though he pushed the story further by inventing an implausible backstory around it, and that he graduated at the top of his class from something he called the Georgia School of High-Performance Driving. That school never existed. Neither did the driving credentials. Schneider later admitted he offered the casting director a beer while he waited, which is not generally recommended audition etiquette. It worked anyway. He landed the role of Bo Duke on the spot, despite the fact that he'd never actually driven the General Lee before being cast and had to learn on the job. What makes the story even better is that he never got to perform the car's famous jumps himself. Those went to trained stunt drivers, but he drove the Charger constantly between takes and became genuinely skilled behind the wheel. An 18-year-old with an invented resume ended up anchoring one of the most recognizable Southern characters in television history for the better part of a decade. The Dukes of Hazzard began filming across actual Georgia towns: Covington, Conyers, Oxford, Social Circle, and the surrounding area, using real back roads, real small-town storefronts, and a level of humidity no soundstage could fake. The now famous opening jump, where the General Lee cleared a police cruiser in a single leap, was filmed on the campus of Oxford College in November 1978, months before the series even premiered. Once Warner Brothers saw how the footage was shaping up and realized they might have a genuine hit, the practical realities of network television took over. Full-time location shooting in Georgia was expensive and logistically difficult, so production shifted largely to the Warner Brothers studios in Burbank and to ranch land in California, standing in for rural Georgia. It's a common trick of the era. Dress up a California hillside with a couple of hay bales and a hand-painted sign, and hope nobody in the audience owns a plant identification guide. Eagle-eyed viewers over the years have pointed out California native vegetation creeping into the backgrounds of episodes supposedly set deep in Hazzard County. The real Georgia locations never fully disappeared from the show's legacy, though. Fans still make pilgrimages to Covington today to see filming spots from those early episodes, even though the fictional Hazzard County spent most of its screen life a couple thousand miles from the actual state it claimed to represent. Some of the car stunts in later seasons were filmed on ranch land not far from Six Flags Magic Mountain, and the production frequently reused retired Los Angeles Police Department cruisers, complete with working light bars and sirens, repainted and rebadged as Hazzard County patrol cars. It's a small irony that a show built entirely around a specific vision of the rural South ended up leaning so heavily on Southern California geography, second-hand LAPD vehicles, and a crew that got very good at making a California hillside pass for backwoods Georgia on a weekly deadline. The single most influential pair of shorts in American television history almost never happened. When Catherine Bach won the role of Daisy Duke in 1979, the producers had something very different in mind for her wardrobe. A poodle skirt pattern to match the tablecloths at the boar's nest, paired with go-go boots and a blonde wig, since the show's creator reportedly wanted Daisy to evoke Dolly Parton. Bach wasn't having it. When she pushed back, the producers sent her across the street from the studio to see what real waitresses were wearing at a local restaurant, and found women in matching poodle skirts, which didn't exactly change her mind. Instead, Bach went home, cut up a pair of jeans into shorts herself, and came back with an outfit built around denim cutoffs, a tied-off top, and boots. The producers liked it. CBS's network censors did not, worried the shorts were too revealing for prime time. So as a compromise, Bach was required to wear flesh-colored pantyhose underneath them to make sure nothing showed that wasn't supposed to. The unintended effect was the opposite of what censors wanted. The pantyhose made her legs look even more polished on camera, and the look became an instant sensation. Denim cutoffs sold out across the country as women copied the style at home. A poster of Bach as Daisy Duke reportedly sold in the millions, and by the early 80s people were simply calling the style Daisy Dukes. The term eventually made its way into the dictionary and has been reinterpreted by pop stars for decades since. A costume department disagreement over a poodle skirt is the reason a specific type of denim shorts still carries a TV character's name almost 50 years later. The General Lee jumped through barns, over creeks, and across highways almost every week, and the crashes weren't digital. Every one of those stunts was performed for real by professional drivers, often at real risk. Injuries among the stunt team were common, given the sheer volume of high-speed jumps the show demanded season after season. But the most serious incident on the production didn't happen to a stunt driver. In 1980, camera assistant Rodney Mitchell was killed, and several other crew members were injured, when a camera truck flipped over near Lake Sherwood, California, while the crew was rehearsing a chase sequence. It was a stark reminder that behind the show's freeze-frame endings and lighthearted tone, real people were taking on real danger every week to produce those iconic chase sequences. It's a somber footnote to a show remembered mostly for its slapstick charm, and one the production team and cast have spoken about candidly in the decades since. You might have had a soft spot for Bo, or Luke, or Daisy, but statistically, if you wrote a letter to the show, there's a good chance it wasn't addressed to any of them. At the height of its popularity, the Dukes of Hazzard was reportedly receiving tens of thousands of pieces of fan mail every month, and a substantial share of it was written directly to the car. Kids wanted to know the engine specs. Adults wanted to know where they could buy one. Fans of all ages just wanted to gush about a particular jump they'd seen in slow motion the week before. The General Lee wasn't just a prop for a huge chunk of the audience. It was the actual main character, and Warner Brothers leaned into that with a wave of Dukes merchandise built almost entirely around the car. It's a strange kind of stardom, a stunt vehicle out-charming an entire cast of professional actors, purely by being orange, loud, and airborne on a weekly basis. Over the course of the series, production burned through more than 300 different 1969 Dodge Chargers, turning each one into a disposable stunt prop destined for a scrapyard after a single spectacular jump. Today, only a small handful of authentic screen-used General Lees are known to still exist, and that scarcity has turned them into genuinely valuable collector's items. In 2012, golfer Bubba Watson paid $110,000 at a Barrett-Jackson auction for Lee 1, the very first General Lee ever used on screen, famous for the jump over a Hazzard County patrol car in the show's opening credits. That particular car had been junked after its single, career-defining jump on the Oxford College campus back in 1978, only to be tracked down years later by the president of a General Lee fan club, found sitting in a scrapyard with a trunk still full of concrete ballast and painstakingly restored over more than a year of work. Meanwhile, a General Lee replica built and owned by John Schneider himself sold at a separate Barrett-Jackson auction in 2008 for a reported $450,000. A striking number for a car that never actually appeared on screen, purely on the strength of its connection to the show. Schneider has reportedly built or restored dozens of General Lees over the years, and he's continued to bring them out for fan events and car shows well into his post-Dukes career. A car that once launched over barns and police cruisers for a weekly TV audience now trades hands, in its rarest surviving form, for sums that would comfortably buy a house. Sorrel Book played Jefferson Davis, Boss Hogg, as a bumbling, greedy small-town crook in a three-piece white suit. The man behind the role could not have been further from that character on paper. Book graduated as valedictorian of his high school class, enrolled at Columbia University at 16, and graduated at 19 before most people have even settled on a college major. From there, he went on to earn a Master of Fine Arts at the Yale School of Drama. During the Korean War, Book served as a counterintelligence officer in the U.S. Army, putting his fluency in multiple languages, including Japanese and Russian, among several others, to direct use. Before Hazzard ever came calling, he'd already built a serious acting resume, including an Emmy nomination and standout supporting roles on shows like MAS*H and All in the Family. To physically become Boss Hogg, Book, who stood 5 feet 6 inches and weighed around 185 pounds during filming, wore extensive padding that expanded his waistline dramatically for the role. He modeled Hogg's syrupy southern drawl on real-life U.S. Senators Sam Ervin and Strom Thurmond, doing genuine character research for what was, on the surface, one of the goofiest villains on television. After the show ended in 1985, Book pivoted to a long career in voice acting, appearing in projects ranging from Scooby-Doo Meets the Boo Brothers to Rock-a-Doodle. He even guest-conducted the Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra at one point. Book passed away in 1994 at age 64, leaving behind the legacy of a Yale-trained, multilingual Korean War veteran who spent 7 seasons wearing a fat suit and playing dumb. Before Bo and Luke were flying over creeks with a banjo soundtrack, the entire concept began as a 1975 theatrical film called Moonrunners, written and directed by G.Y. Waldron, the same man who later created the TV series. The film followed a moonshine running family in a fictional Georgia county, and it included several character names and concepts that would carry directly over into the show, including Uncle Jesse and a corrupt sheriff. Moonrunners was a considerably rougher piece of work than the TV series it inspired. It leaned harder into genuine violence and consequence, and in a striking departure from the family-friendly show that followed. Uncle Jesse doesn't survive the film. When Waldron adapted the concept for network television a few years later, virtually all of that harder edge got sanded down, replaced with slapstick chases, freeze-frame endings, and a sheriff who never actually managed to catch anyone. The Dukes of Hazzard, in other words, was a toned-down television reworking of a much grittier movie, stripped of its consequences and re-engineered for Friday night family viewing. If you've ever caught yourself humming Just the Good Old Boys, you're not alone. The show's theme song was a legitimate commercial success in its own right, not just a memorable bit of TV scoring. Good Old Boys, written and performed by country legend Waylon Jennings, hit #1 on Billboard's Hot Country chart and climbed into the mainstream Hot 100 as well, a genuine crossover hit at a time when TV theme songs rarely charted at all. Jennings also served as the show's off-screen narrator throughout its run, giving Hazzard County its distinctive folksy voiceover and delivering the closing moral of the week in that unmistakable drawl. The song's popularity outlasted the series by decades. It's been covered and reinterpreted by a long list of artists in the years since. Everything from straightforward country tributes to genuinely odd novelty versions, cementing it as one of the more recognizable pieces of television music of its era, especially across the American South. It's a rare case of a TV theme managing to live a full musical life entirely separate from the show that spawned it, still instantly recognizable to people who've never watched a single full episode. When Warner Brothers greenlit a big-screen version of the Dukes of Hazzard in 2005, it seemed like the obvious moment for a nostalgic cameo lap from the original cast. Instead, John Schneider, Tom Wopat, and Catherine Bach all declined to participate. Ben Jones, who played Mechanic Cooter on the show, went considerably further. He publicly criticized the film for its heavier sexual content, argued it strayed far from the family-friendly spirit of the original series, and called on longtime fans to boycott it. The reaction split opinion at the time, with some pointing out that the original series had its own history of leaning on Daisy Duke's wardrobe for laughs and attention. Schneider, for his part, was blunt when asked directly whether he'd seen the finished film, calling it simply terrible. Whatever the merits of the debate, it's a notable moment. The people who spent 7 years building the show's identity chose to stay as far away from its big-screen reinvention as they could. At the absolute height of the show's popularity, with merchandise flooding toy stores and lunchboxes everywhere, John Schneider and Tom Wopat simply walked away from the set in 1982. The reason wasn't ego or a pursuit of movie stardom, as tabloids of the era liked to suggest. It was a genuine dispute over their cut of the merchandising profits generated by their own likenesses. CBS's response was to recast the cousins entirely, introducing Coy and Vance Duke, played by Byron Cherry and Christopher Mayer, for most of the show's 5th season. Ratings dropped noticeably during the swap, and once the contract dispute was resolved, Schneider and Wopat returned to their original roles in early 1983. Coy and Vance quietly vanished from the show as if they'd never existed, with virtually no explanation given on screen. To this day, plenty of fans couldn't tell you which one was which. It's one of the stranger, less remembered chapters in the show's run, a real financial standoff between actors and a network, resolved by simply erasing the temporary replacements from continuity altogether. In 1983, the Dukes of Hazzard universe got the animated treatment with the Dukes, a Saturday morning cartoon that reimagined Bo, Luke, and the rest of the cast racing across an international automobile circuit, rather than just running moonshine around one fictional county. Boss Hogg and Sheriff Roscoe tagged along too, still scheming to cheat their way to victory. Because the cartoon premiered right in the middle of the real-life contract dispute between the network and Schneider and Wopat, the animated versions of Bo and Luke were initially replaced by animated versions of Coy and Vance, the same stand-in cousins from the live-action show, for the cartoon's first season. Once the actors settled their dispute and returned to the live-action series, Coy and Vance quietly disappeared from the cartoon too, with Bo and Luke swapped back in for season 2. No explanation offered there either. The animated series only ran for a couple of seasons and a limited episode count, but it's a genuinely strange bit of trivia. For one entire year, an entire generation of Saturday morning viewers were watching cartoon stand-ins race around the globe, while the real Bo and Luke were tied up in a very real Hollywood pay dispute. One of the show's more controversial behind-the-scenes shifts happened as the series aged. Producers began incorporating miniature car effects to depict some of the General Lee's increasingly outrageous stunts, rather than relying entirely on full-size stunt cars driven by professional drivers, as they had for the show's early years. The change was partly a budget-saving move. Replacing wrecked full-size Chargers repeatedly wasn't cheap, and partly an attempt to compete visually with the flashier effects being used on rival shows of the era, like NBC's Knight Rider. Several cast members, including Tom Wopat, were vocal critics of the change, feeling it undercut the practical, real stunt spirit that had made the show's chase sequences so distinctive in the first place. It's a small but telling piece of TV history, The same show that built its identity on real stunt drivers risking real cars on real dirt roads eventually leaned, at least in part, on the same kind of model